add this as a plug at the beginning of the episode. If you guys want to go to Israel with us, me and Vanessa take a trip to Israel once a year. Eventually that may become 2 times a year or 3 times a year, depending on how many people are interested. Our 2024 trip in January is almost completely filled up. We've only got like 2, 3, maybe 5 spots left on that trip, depending on how packed we want the bus to be. But that is going to be an amazing trip. The people on that trip are really, really cool. We've been getting to meet them, and we'll be seeing them in January. Now, our 2025 trip, we're going to be starting to plan soon. And so if you would like to join us on that trip, definitely email us. Our email is in the description down below. And you can email us for that trip. We'd love to have you guys on the trip. But I'm talking about that because in this specific verse from Acts 17, we're going to be talking about the Areopagus, which is in Greece, which we actually got to go to last trip that we went on. We went to the Areopagus, which is also known as Mars Hill. And then we also went to a bunch of different places all over Athens and some different places around the area there to kind of check out some biblical sites as well as some historical sites. Some really, really cool stuff overall. But this is Paul in Athens, exactly where we were, talking at the Areopagus. And so let me give you a little bit of the background on this, and then we'll dive into the verse. So the Areopagus is kind of like it's an area, but it's like a group of people, right? Who are like these scholars and philosophers. Like they would all gather in this one place and they would have conversations about wisdom and knowledge and philosophy, right? Mm-hmm. And so all the smartest people basically would gather here and have debates about things or come to give understanding to this wise council of people, right? Mm-hmm. And so Paul is in Athens, and before he goes to the Areopagus, he is like kind of around the area, and he's talking to everybody. He's talking to the Jews that are there. He's talking to the random people in the markets that are there. He's kind of talking to everyone, trying to get them to understand the truth of the gospel, doing Paul things, right? Mm-hmm. And so some of the people are like, oh, it's interesting what you have to say. Like, you must be a divine teacher from another area, like a teacher of some foreign divination, basically. Mm-hmm. And so they bring him to the Areopagus, and which we kind of colloquially know as Mars Hill. Like, that's kind of what we mostly, at least in English, that's what we mostly know it as. Because I haven't really heard of Areopagus until we went. Like, I knew the word, but I didn't really know what it was. But I heard a lot about Mars Hill. Mm-hmm. They take him to this place and they begin to allow him to speak to let them get more understanding about what he's talking about, right? Not necessarily because they like are excited about him or they're like, look at this amazing gospel that he wants to teach us, mm-hmm. but they just want more knowledge about these foreign things that are going on that they think that he can teach them about, right? Mm-hmm. So starting in Acts 17, verse 22 is where we're going to start. So it says, so Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with the inscription to the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God, and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us, sorry. For in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said. So I wanted to bring this up because I love the way in which Paul does this, right? It's something that we are really in tune with in the way that we speak, because if Christianity is true, right, which I believe it to be, then I should be observing and giving truth to the people that I talk to. And so in terms of YouTube channels or podcasts or whatever else that we're doing, I am never going to offer a false thing, right? Something that I believe to be false or something that I am not sure about, right? Like, we may have conversations about things that we're not sure about, but when I say something, right, and I'm saying a factual statement, I want that to be fact. I want it to be truth. And so whether I'm talking about scripture or something in the world or a historical fact, like, I want those things to be accurate and I want them to be true, and I want also to encapsulate as much as we can culture and understanding and being able to communicate with people well. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So Paul here encapsulates all of that. Mm-hmm. He goes to this place where these wise men are sitting and they're talking about philosophy and why we are who we are, right? Paul is not going unprepared. Mm-mm. He's going very prepared into this, talking to the men of Athens, because he knows this is his shot to talk to the higher ups in the area, right? Mm-hmm. The people who are kind of like the in crowd, the smartest of the smart. In Greek culture, this would have been the group that is elite in a lot of ways, because they are so intelligent and wise, because in Greek culture, it is those people who are elevated. It is wisdom and knowledge that kind of gives you this higher place, right? Mm-hmm. And so Paul doesn't take this for granted. He goes into it with exactly what he wants to say, and he speaks words that a lot of them we're not prepared for, right? And not only does he speak his own truth, right, of like the Bible and like what actually happened in the beginning of time and all of that, but he also brings in cultural significance. Mm-hmm. So that last little line that I read in verse 27, 28. So he says that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. That in him we live and move and have our being is part of Scripture, right? But then we get this. It says, as even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring. So he's using their own poets to give them insight into Scripture.
Yeah. The for we are indeed his offspring is from
offspring, yeah.
Areopagus poem.
Yeah, so a poet of the day,
yeah.
Right? And Jesus even does this,
yeah.
Right? We see him, as he says, he uses Aesop's fables to tell part of it. He says, we sang a dirge, but you did not weep. Mm-hmm. What is it? We sang a song, but you did not dance. We sang a dirge, but you did not weep. Mm-hmm. Like that is Aesop's fables, right? Mm-hmm. And so even Jesus is using these culturally significant things. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so as we think about how we communicate on YouTube or wherever we are, even if we're teaching in a young adults group or talking to someone on the Sunday morning, like everywhere that we go, I think it's important that we have this in mind, right? Mm-hmm. Understand where people are culturally, because cultures are different everywhere. Right. Paul didn't go into this with Jewish culture in mind. Mm-hmm. He went into this with Greek culture in mind. Right. He didn't go into this with Chinese culture in mind, right? Like he came into this with Greek culture because they are Greek. And so to understand them better, to make them feel known and accepted, to make them feel welcomed into what he's saying, he's trying to be very clear about what he's saying.
Yeah. Like he understood them. Like he's read this stuff and knows where they're coming from, and this is why this truth applies to them as well. Like, I love that. It's another apologetic-y thing. Like, I love that. Right.
Yeah.
I love Acts 17 especially because it was like he's just like telling the truth and what is the apologetics verse?
Peter?
First Peter?
Mm-hmm. I think so, but I can't remember off the top of my head. It's like 3:16 or something. 1:15.
Something like that.
I don't remember.
Maybe you're right.
I don't think I'm right, but
anyway, where like he had a defense for the gospel, right? Yeah. Like he knew his gospel well, but he also knew the culture, like you're saying.
Yeah.
And he understood his audience. Like, and that's how he, like you said, he wasn't trying to speak about different things or different cultures. He was speaking to this culture, and he was like, I love that.
Yeah.
It's my favorite.
Yeah, it's super, super cool. Because I think about this in terms of YouTube, especially because this is my world, right? Like when I'm making a video, the reason why we start these videos out explaining certain things or talking about certain things or giving different perspectives is because we want the people that are watching this video to get into the video and really understand what we're talking about, right? for them to be able to relate to what we're talking about. So if we're talking about someone in our life who we feel is running away from God, like we want to be able to state that so that other people can feel, man, I have that same situation. How do I deal with that?
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And so like when we're talking about this, I think all of us, it's more than just a YouTuber thing, right?
Yeah.
It's more than just a social media thing. It's more than just a teacher thing. This is a relational thing. And so whether I'm talking to my mom or you or, you know, like a friend that I have, right? I need to understand where they're coming from because I'm going to talk very differently if I'm trying to get my point across, if I'm trying to talk to someone, if I'm trying to convince them of the gospel, especially, like I'm going to talk very differently to my redneck best friend Bryce, right? Than I am to your Hispanic mother, right? Yeah. And so there's going to be very different things that are coming out of my mouth because I want to connect with them to the best of my ability.
Yeah. It's is it Paul that says like to the he's like
a chameleon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Paul's
not in a fake way.
Right.
Not in a you're trying to be all these different types of people. You're just trying to make it more relatable, make it more tangible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Paul did that a lot. Depending on who he was with, he was able to like connect with them and approach them in a better way. And this went as far even to being like, you know, if your brother struggles with alcohol, don't have alcohol in front of him, right? If your brother struggles with meat, don't have don't have that in front of him. Like that's going to be an issue. It may not be a sin, but it's gonna have consequences for them. So just think of them, you know. It goes even that far. So yeah, relationally, I think this is like such a cool verse. And I think Paul does such a great job. If you guys have a chance to go check out Paul's writings on this, man, there's just so much in all the books that in all the letters that he wrote or the stuff that's written about him of just how he was able to navigate the world in a way that we don't often see. Because generally what happens, right? Let's talk about the bad side of it. You have preachers that come in and they're like yelling at you the same things that they yell at everybody else, right? And so like you'll get a preacher that comes in and he's like screaming hell and like fire and death, and he's not telling you about how good God is or how that's going to come to you, right? So depending on where you're at, because some people may need that talk of like hell and fire and this evil that's coming for you, right? Yeah. But on the other side, some people are going to need the other stuff, right? And it's a balance of the two. And not only in that world, but also how you communicate those things. So how do you communicate hell to a 5-year-old and a 50-year-old?
Right.
How do you communicate God's love to a woman or a man, right? And so we have to think about those contexts because it's really, really important for how we navigate that. And I've seen it done wrong so many times because we'll have, for example, like one of the things that frustrates me the most is when you go and talk to a youth group, right? Because I was in youth group for a long time. And this happened a lot when I was in youth group, and I've seen it a lot in other youth groups since. You'll have a speaker that comes in and he'll trash on the generation of the youth group. Yeah. And he'll come in and be like, oh, Gen Z sucks. Or for me, it was millennials, right? Like they would come in and be like, oh, millennials suck. They do this, and this. You know, you guys shouldn't be like them. And I'm like, that is me. What are you talking about? Yeah. You know, like this is my generation. Yeah. So why would you down talk me when you're about to give a message of the gospel? Like that made no sense to me. And it hurt me, you know? And it's like, okay, how can I avoid doing that? How can I come and bring truth, but also have cultural significance so that everything is built up in that, you know?
So how can you?
Well, I think you have to study a lot, right? Like Paul didn't just sit around and like yell at everybody what he was preaching. He did some of that, but he did it purposefully, right? And with the correct words at the correct time. What does he say? Well, I've been looking at all your stuff. I've been observing what you guys are doing. You're certainly one of the most religious people I've ever met. When maybe they wouldn't consider themselves that, right? Especially today, 2023, a lot of people that are like wise and like smart, right? It's this atheistic group of people that are like, oh, I have ascended, right? Like that's how it feels a lot of times. They're like, oh, these dumb Christians, they just don't know what they're talking about. Right. And so we take the example from Paul of he did his research. So we spend time in the culture. We spend time understanding atheists. We spend time understanding these other religions. Not that we have to study every religion under the sun because that would take all of our time, right? We need to study the truth enough to understand it right when we come to a counterfeit. How do we engage with that?
Yeah.
right? And so Paul does that here. He says, I've seen all this stuff. You look very religious. I see that you have this one, monument basically to the unknown God. Mm-hmm. Well, let me tell you about him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because he's known to me.
Right.
I know his name. Mm-hmm. I sit with him. He knows me. Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, all these other gods are just fake. Like they don't live in these temples. Like the God that is actually real, like he did these things, right? He created everything from nothing, and he created man and woman, and everybody was born through them. Like he's telling them these facts. Again, all of that comes from research. It doesn't come from just randomness.
Right.
So I think that's really, really important for sure.
Yeah, that's a good point.
If you want to check out this full episode, you can do that on patreon.com/thesnipelife. This is the best way to help us to support what we're doing here on the Better Not Easy channel. Thank you very much.
Just remember that following Jesus is better not easy.